In this lesson, we're going to create a search form that will search athletes on the Sports DB database. To begin with, we'll open up the Sports DB solution file from last time. In the U4 Sports main dataset, you can see the athlete table. I'll just remind you the fields: the athlete ID, the forename, the surname and the telephone number of the athlete. We're first of all going to create a new form. So we go to Project, Add Form. We're going to make sure that Windows Form is selected, and we're going to name this FRM. Remember the naming conventions. We're just going to call it Search Athletes. We're going to go to Add, and then we're going to use some data from the athlete table. Now I want to use a data grid view, so if you make sure that athlete is selected on the combo box, select data grid view and simply drag and drop that into the form. Resize it a little bit. Then what I want you to do is continue to design this form using this design template. You can see we're using the athlete data here. Now the data grid view is already put inside your form. Make certain you rename this form FRM Search Athletes if it's not already done so, which it should be done. Make certain the text property of the form is Fill Grid with Data. Then you need to add 3 labels, which again are in the toolbox. In the text property, select Athlete by ID. The other label, Search Athlete Family Name. The other label, Search Athlete Telephone Number. Then enter 3 text boxes. One named TXT Search Ath ID. One named TXT Search S Name. One named TXT Search Tel. Then we want to add 2 buttons onto the form. BTN Clear, that's the name, and in the text property just type Clear. The other button is BTN Close, that's the name of the button, and Close is the text property of this. If you pause the video, create this form, and I'll see you in a couple of minutes. After you've completed the form, you should have a form something similar to this. Okay. We're now going to use XML schema document, or the XSD. You'll notice that when we created forms earlier, the XSD is here. If we double click onto this, you'll notice that this contains tables from our database. So if you can see the tables from the database, and you can see athlete, athlete to team, events proceed, etc. What we're going to use today is the athlete table, but we're also going to use the athlete table adapter, which holds all the data based on this query we're going to create. Now, first of all, let's have a quick look at what this query does. If I click onto the query, right click and configure, this actually holds an SQL statement that we've used a number of times in the past. So select AthID, FName, SName, telephone, which, if you remember, is the same fields in our athlete table from DBO athlete, which is the table. Okay. Now, if we want to edit this in some kind of way, we can go into Query Builder. Query Builder, you can start queries from scratch, or you can edit existing queries. So if we go to Query Builder, and you'll notice that this is very similar to Access, if you remember a little while ago, where it contains your field names from your table. Then you can see output, whether you want to see it or not, and then the search and type order filter, this type of thing. But we're now using an SQL statement here. If I execute the query, it should show you the actual results from that query, and we should have 40 records because it's showing you all of the table data. Now what we can do, we can create our new queries based on our requirements. For instance, we can create a query to search just athlete IDs. We can create queries to search people's surnames, forenames, etc., telephone numbers. So what we're going to do, we're going to create a couple of queries based around the table data. I'm going to click cancel for that for a minute. I'll cancel as well. Now we're going to create a new query which will search for the athlete ID. So if I click onto here, right click, add query. Now the SQL statement is what we're looking for. We're not creating a new store procedure because we've already got them in our file. We're not using existing store procedures, etc. So the use SQL statement, we go to next. The select statement we want, which just returns rows. We could use a number of types of queries here, which returns a single value. We can do an update query, a delete query, insert query. We're just using the select rows option today. Then you can see that it's brought the query up, which displays everything. We don't particularly want that. So what we can do, we can put our own query in there. And I'm going to put the one that searches for an athlete ID. Now you'll notice something very new here. In the where clause, which we've used in the past to search for certain data, we're searching the athlete ID field equals to this thing here. Now the @athID is a variable, or in this particular case, a parameter. It will ask for user input to complete the query, and then we can use any input that the user inputs to the form via a text box. I'll explain a bit more. So if I go to Query Builder now, it comes the same SQL query here. But if I execute the query, it will ask for a value. Now I know for a fact there's a record number there with @ID number 1. So if I click the number 1 in there, and this is just the same as if I had typed number 1 inside a text box on our form, it will then bring the results up. @ID for number 1. Okay. We now go to OK on that because we tested the query. We now know it runs very well, so we're fine. Go to next. Now, this is where we need to name this query, because it's very important that we name these very relevant to what the query is doing. So I'm going to put fill by and then @ID search. Okay, and I'm going to take this into both fields. Okay, then we go to next. Then if everything's okay, we will get this. If we've got any errors, it will come up with errors, but this time we're fine. We go to finish. Now you'll notice this appears here. It's a new query. So if I run this query now, preview data, again, it will ask us what we want. So if we type in number 2 this time, for instance, and go to preview it, the number 2 athlete will be shown. So this now we can use inside our form. Now we don't need to remember this because as we type the code in the database, it will actually bring this up for us. You'll see that very soon. So what we're going to do, we're going to return to the form. We're going to click on this search athlete by ID, and then we're going to put some code inside here. Now this is very important we get this code right, so I'll actually double click the text box, and that's where the code's going to be. Okay. Now this text changed property is very important. I'll show you that very soon in the event. But we now need to type some code into here. Now I've prepared some code here. So if we simply type this code in here, I'll explain that what it is in a minute. So, and we can paste that into there. Now, what this is doing is looking at the me, in other words, it belongs to this particular form, athlete table adapter, which is exactly what's on our XSD form, athlete table adapter. Fill by AthID search. Now this is the name of our new query we just created. Okay. And then it's looking at how we're going to use this query. So it's me, again, containing all this form. U4 sports main dataset, athlete. So it's actually the athlete table from the U4 sports main database. Now, this is very important because we've actually created a numeric type of field for the athlete ID. Text boxes as default contain text objects. Now we can't use a text property on a number value. So we've got to convert the number that the user types in into the text box to a value. So that's why we use the value function, the val text search AthID. So if you remember, that's what we actually name that, and then .text. So wherever is contained inside the text search AthID is the parameter that will be then given to the fill by AthID search. So if I go into the design, if I click onto here, and then if I go to the event, and if we scroll down to the bottom, it's text change. Now if I select this box here, it allows us to select which text box we want this to be selected from, and it's the search AthID text change box, which is that one there. Now if we was to run this, I want to explain something first before we do, because this is similar to the default program that loads up when we run the code. For instance, there's similarity between this line and this line. When we have run the code in the past, as by default, you get all of the fields and all the records with no parameters. So me, athlete table adapter, fill. Now the fill, if you remember, was this query here. So that's where the similarities are, but this time we're using the fill by search ID, SportsDB properties, and we need to make sure that we need to just debug this search athlete. Then we can run the program, and then it will actually run the athlete search form for us. This is the one we created. So now, as a default, it runs the fill query. But if I am to type in a number, let's say number 3, because I'm using the onTextChange property, as soon as I enter a number into this text box, it automatically filters down the data grid view to be the selected record. So that's basically how this is working. Now we've created the section to search for athlete IDs. Let's go ahead and try to search for someone's details in the surname type field. Okay, again, we're going to right click, add query, use SQL statements, select which returns rows, and then we can type the query that we require in there. So if I go into here, copy that, paste that into there, and you'll notice very similar to what we did last time. Select ath ID, fname, surname, telephone from athlete, where sname, now here's where the difference is you've not seen before. It's the like operator. The like is something similar. So if we type the letter A in there, it will bring up all surnames with or beginning with A. If we want to search all surnames that's got the A contained in the field, we would use something what's called a wildcard. I'll show you that very soon on the programming statement. So that's the actual query we want. So pause the video, put that SQL statement in there, and then when you've done that, click on next. This time we're going to name this fill by sname search. So again, I'm going to use that in both fields. Go to next. If everything's okay, we will get this, and we go to finish. Now that's the next query done. Now to save to keep coming back, I'm going to actually create the third one as well. Okay, and the third one will be searching on people's telephone number. So again, add query, SQL statement, next, next, and then I'm going to use the final statement on this. Let's go to next, and then this time fill by tel search. It's very important that you use names that's very relevant to the query types and what they do, to save you, losing direction on what's going on with your queries. And finish. Now we can use these quite happily now in the next part of our programming code. So if we go now back to design. Now if we double click onto the search athlete family name, we can use something very similar here. It's me, table athlete adapter, fill by, now this is again, as you already know by now, the query is created in the XSD. This isn't going to change, so they're all same so far. The only difference, and I'm going to come back, as I said before, to the wildcard search. The wildcard character, or one of them, because there are a few, The one we're going to be using is the percentage sign. The percentage sign here, percentage sign here. Now this looks a bit of a complex line, but it's really not, because what it's saying is anything that the user has typed in the txt search sname field, then we're going to add the beginning, the wildcard percentage, and the end wildcard percentage. So what this is saying, whatever the user types in, anything that's contained inside there, it will search that query for. So let's just demonstrate that to you. So if I go to start. Now if I type in an athlete's surname, now I can just do anything that's contained inside here. So if I just type A, it now starts narrowing the searches down. Okay, so rather than 40 records, it's got 20 records now. If I do M, it now brings a combination of AM. So it's AM, AM, AM. And that narrows the search down instantly. And because we're using the text change property, again, it's using very interactively and very fast data indeed. Okay, if I want to find out what beginning with A, type A, and you can see there. Now, if I wanted to, I can simply click on that and make sure they're actually alphabetically sorted. So it's easy for me to see. So it's Acosta, for instance, and then that comes up quite happily there. And that's what that wildcard does. So anything contained in that search. And then the final one, we're going to type in a new one behind the athlete search. So double click. Again, I've got some code prepared. And then we can put this one inside there. Now this is almost identical to the previous one, but this time we're going to use the telephone number search text box in exactly the same way. So nothing's changed except the actual query we created earlier. So that's that. Fine. So if I go to search and the telephone, so let's go to 3333. So if I go to 33, see, it searches for that one and just narrows the data grid view down to the exact search that we want. Okay, so all that's next to be done now is to put code behind the clear button and the close button. In the clear button, all that we need to do is clear out the user's input from the text boxes and reload the default data that's inside the data grid view when we first start. Now the way to do that, we go on to our form, double click clear, and then we can type in the clear code. Now again, I'm going to copy and paste this in, and then you can pause the video. I'll explain this first. Now, if we look at the default load situation when you open the form, me table adapter.fill. Me table adapter.fill. Now you can see the .fill, if you remember, is the query which loads up all the details, all the fields, and all the records from the athlete table. We're using exactly the same type of thing because we want to refill that. Now, something that you've not seen before is the clear statement. All we're going to do is the text search athID, the text search sname, the text search tel, which are these from your form. We're going to reset them to be cleared. So clear clears all text from the text box control. Then we're going to do something what's called set focus. So when the user presses the clear button, the cursor will then flash or be prepared inside the text search athID. Then we use the focus, which sets input focus to the control. So if I was to run that now, and then I typed some kind of statement in here, it doesn't matter whether it's right or wrong. If I clear it, it will clear that and come back to fresh, which is exactly what it wants. Now, the big advantage of this, you can do combination searches. So let's say that I wanted to find Greer and the number 548. So if I just type G or here in there, and then I wanted to type 548, that now narrows the searches down based on 2 search criteria, which is very, very powerful indeed. Now, we've only got 40 records in this data table, but if we had 400,000 data records, this would be far more economical to use this situation, because obviously the more records we have, the more difficult it is to find a record. Think about this scenario. Whenever you've phoned up a help centre and they ask for a reference number of some kind, if we were to type in your reference number in the select ID, let's say the reference number was 9, okay. If you'd have typed in a 5 or 7 or 10 digit reference number that the user on the support desk was asking you for, that would find your record straight away. If you said to them, oh, I'm sorry, I can't find my reference number, they will then ask you either your address or your name. If they search your name, they can put the search box in the name, or they might ask you for a telephone number. Now, a telephone number is a unique identifier, which is a really good field to put in there, because that will then find exactly where you are straight away in the data table. So this really does have lots of power, and I want you to start thinking now of what other things you can do in projects you may create of your own with this. The only one aspect that's left to do there now is close the form, which you already know how to do. If we go to close and then me.close, okay, double click, and then you can see it automatically puts the parentheses inside there, and that actually allows us then to save all the files that we just done. Go to start, and then that then allows to close the form, all nice and neat and tidy. Now I have a task for you. The task is for you to connect the search form that we just created to the main menu form that we created earlier. Now I'll leave that with you, because you all know how to do that now. As a recap, we first of all created some new queries in different ways by using the XSD document. We created the queries using SQL code that you already knew. We then attached the queries to the query we wish to open when we're loading up the, in this case, data grid view. We then use parameters to get user input from the form and then replace that data inside the query.